Welcome to our show, Ghosts Are Near. This will be a show about paranormal research and investigation. Paranormal meaning that which is above the normal. We are members of New England Anomalies Research. I'd like to introduce my wife, Sandra.
Hello.
Who is the co-founder of New England Anomalies Research. My brother, Carl.
Hello there.
And I am Keith, founder of New England Anomalies Research. You may have seen my brother and I on the TV show Ghost Hunters, which of course is about paranormal research itself. During our show, we're going to explore various aspects of paranormal research, the various techniques used, various experiences we've had, and eventually we plan to go out on location and show you some of our paranormal investigation techniques and share with you some of the experiences we've had. Now, how did we first become interested in paranormal investigation? That's one of the questions we're always asked. Well, with myself and my brother Carl, it goes back quite a few years. We joined our first paranormal investigation group when we were 17 years of age, but before then, we did a lot of exploring and research on our own. And what mainly piqued our interest was the fact that we grew up in what would be called a haunted house. Now, when I say a haunted house, I don't mean we lived in the Amityville house and we had to rush out and sleep outside in the woods at night. No, but every once in a while, something would happen unexplained that our parents really had no logical explanation for and really could not be attributed to anything of natural causes. For example, one time when we were very young, probably about 4 years old, my mother was drinking a glass of water. Suddenly the glass of water just emptied itself. She was about to drink it and we heard a slurping sound and it was empty. And they had really no rational explanation for that. So one thing after another began to happen. Things would disappear, things would be moved when we know we'd left them a certain place, only to show up later in various odd places where we knew we hadn't left these objects. So we'd hear different scratches, bumps in the night, so to speak, to use a cliche. But I'm going to ask my brother Carl what he remembers from those early years, in our earliest childhood.
Not much. It was a long time ago.
Yes, it was a long time ago.
No,
I'm sure you remember some things.
Some things I do, yes. Well, I remember experimentation with a Ouija board when I was 14 and 15 years old of age.
Oh, yes, the
years
Ouija
of
board,
age, yes.
yeah.
My sister and I would play on the Ouija board, the Parker Brothers Oracle game, and we would ask for messages, answers to questions, and a personality seemed to take over the board and identified itself as Sylvia. Naturally, we asked for a sign. Give us a sign. The presence on the board spelled out through our fingertips on the planchette, spelled out cellar, C-E-L-L-A-R. So we went to the top of our basement stairs, and we waited there for about 20 minutes, didn't hear anything. Just as we were getting up to leave, there were rappings on the walls. And then we heard it again, 3 raps it sounded like. So we assumed this was the spirit of the Ouija board. And shortly after that, there were manifestations in this basement area. Furniture would be moved around. There were bangings on the wall quite loud. And then a hostile presence eventually seemed to take over the Ouija board and started giving us more ominous answers. So that was how it all started out with me. I became fascinated with the paranormal world after this. I was saying, what could do this? Now, it is conceivable that it was just impulses of our fingers through our own subconscious spelling out letters on the board. But we couldn't explain why furniture was found rearranged downstairs, and various things would happen, like a shadow-like apparition would be seen. My sister saw that, I witnessed it. And some years later, I was recording some music down in the basement area where this activity would take place. When I played the recording back, at the end of this tape recording, a sound came out that sounded like a voice. And it sounded like a voice saying, "Someone help me," in slow motion. I was there with a friend when this happened. I never knew this happened to anybody else. Since then, I've heard many accounts of EVPs, electronic voice phenomenon.
Yes, that was our first actual experience with EVP, electronic voice phenomena, where you may not hear a voice audibly, but it's being picked up on audio tape. And what did you think of that when it happened, Carl?
Well, I thought I was the only one this ever happened to. I couldn't understand what. I took it to be a spirit voice, of course.
Little did you know.
No, and then my friend who had some recording equipment sped this cassette recording up to 9 times original speed. And at that speed, it comes out quite clearly as a woman's voice, and it said, "Carl, help me. Help." So I was on my way to becoming a paranormal investigator. I said, oh, I've got results here. I never knew what to...
Actual evidence, then.
I had actual evidence, yes. The tape no longer exists. It got wet and, you know, corroded and fell apart. But
that was quite a few years ago. But
yes,
it's interesting that that was actually an experience where you heard a disembodied entity calling your name, personalizing you. It wasn't just random. In other words, it wasn't just something that was residual or playback, something reoccurring, almost like a videotape.
No, apparently it was a cry for help. I've never known what to do about it or what to make of that.
You mentioned that you attempted something called spirit rescue at the time, but it was unsuccessful.
I had some friends come together and try and contact this entity and lay it to rest, so to speak, set it at ease, but I don't think we really got any results from it. This, apparently the same entity manifested visually in this basement area. I saw it on several occasions very clearly, the form of a woman dressed in clothing of perhaps a century earlier. As solid as you sitting next to me, she seemed very real. She would walk noiselessly across the basement floor, and then she just vanished.
You didn't think she was a spirit at first, did you? When you first saw her, what was your initial reaction to it?
When I first beheld this being, I thought it was just a person who had come into the cellar, either a family member in the dim light. And this was all within the span of perhaps a second, this thought process. And then I recognized that it wasn't anybody I knew. Then it became apparent that this was somebody that's dressed in clothes not of this era and not making any sound as she glided across the floor. So then I assumed this was some spirit entity. And it was the consistency of this manifestation that convinced me it was legitimate. If I had seen it perhaps once, I might think it was, you know, lucid dreaming. I'd put it down to some hallucination. But because of that consistency with which I beheld her, I assume it was a genuine spirit form.
You mentioned you contacted an entity that spelled out its name on the Ouija board named Sylvia. Do you think this was the same entity?
I assume so. In paranormal investigation, there are very few definites. You hear maybe, supposed, alleged, you know. I assume it was probably the same entity that spelled its name out on the board. That's just a guess.
Now, as paranormal researchers and on the TV show Ghost Hunters, Carl and I also function as consulting demonologists. You want to go over that term for us, Carl, demonologist?
Well, a demonologist is a paranormal investigator that specializes in the study and exploration of non-human entities. That is, spirit entities that apparently are not generated by human beings. They exist outside of the human realm. They behave somewhat as the standard ghost, the ghostly manifestations. But they seem to generate much more power. And they are generally of a malicious nature. Apparently they're hostile. They have some resentment against human beings.
And when you go in on a consultation to find out if there's an inhuman involvement, what do you do to differentiate a regular haunting, a human spirit, and an inhuman spirit?
That will generally be established in the initial interview with the clients. I will ask, what makes you think this is a hostile presence? Very often these demonic entities will inflict harm on the human inhabitants of a house. They may wake up with scratches on their arms. They may find unexplained bruising. Heavy objects are moved around. If they have children, often the children report seeing a form. And this form initially is friendly, but then starts off, then becomes hostile after a time. So these are indications that it might be demonic in nature. Also, if there are foul smells accompanying this manifestation. Again, heavy objects that generally the human type of spirit, which seems to be the remnant of a deceased human being, will not have the power to move around heavy objects like an armoire or a couch. But these demonic entities seem to be capable of doing this. And they are invariably hostile. When some client calls us in, you know, they're disturbed by this and they want it out of their house. Why? Because it's bothering them, because it's scaring them, it's harming their children. It's not like just the image of a human being passing by, as I experienced. This is something they feel is malevolent, and the animals in the house, if they have pets, are upset by it. The children become upset and frightened. So it generally seems to be doing them some harm.
Now, you mentioned children a few times and pets. Are they generally more aware that there is a presence that's normally unseen to adults?
They seem to be. Of course, when you have a dog looking at unseen object, that's pretty much his job description. That's what dogs do. They look at things that you don't see there. But why will a dog or a cat suddenly become agitated and seem like it's following something moving around the room? You know, if that happens enough times, you wonder. The dog obviously is awake. He's not dreaming, or it's not dreaming. They seem to be more attuned to another realm that's invisible to adults, as are small children. They just seem to be able to pick up on unseen entities, particularly if they're hostile, if they're suspected to be demonic in origin.
Mm-hmm. Now, Sandra, in many of the investigations we've been on and the research we've done, you found that as well, that children seem to be very affected. They seem to be aware and even sometimes targeted, young people, adolescents, and pets as well.
I have found that to be the I think it's all the more distressing to the adults in the household when the children are targeted. This is what an inhuman spirit is trying to generate fear. It feeds off fear. That's its energy. Mm-hmm. That's how it's able to manifest these phenomena.
And children and adolescents do seem to be targets for the demonic spirit in these types of haunts, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. You agree, Carl?
Yes, if there is a reason for that, it's perhaps because they're more defenseless than the adults would be. They can't make decisions about where they'll live. You know, they are more easily frightened. They don't have as much of an understanding about dangers in the world, so they're more open for targeting by these unseen entities.
Yes, and I'd say children and young people seem to be generally more aware that their senses haven't been trained to tune these things out as much, I say, as adults.
Well, Keith, with my own experience, I don't see visual manifestations of spirits these days. It's been a long time since I have. I used to more frequently in my teen years, that spirit energy that I described.
In your teen years when you witnessed most of these things.
No, I believe my experience was genuine, but I seem to have grown out of the ability to see these. I've heard plenty of examples of spirit voice or alleged spirit voices on tape recordings since then, but I don't generally see spirits. I may see what might be an apparition, you know, like a shadow form moving by my peripheral vision. That will register some motion, but as far as something standing right in front of me that looks like the form of a human being, I haven't had that experience in some time, and I believe I've lost the ability to perceive such entities. I mean, I may again, I would like to, but it's, I find through interviewing clients and getting case histories that it's much more infrequent with older individuals. Generally, children will see spirit forms. Animals seem to. You know, the instances where they'll follow something walking around the house or seem to be focusing on something. And the children are also reporting seeing an entity, seeing some spirit form or some form that looks human. You know, it seems to correlate. They have a commonality. But the adults generally don't see these things. They may wake up with scratches on their arms or bruising or find some furniture rearranged in the house, but they are not usually the ones who see spirit forms.
Well, getting back to your history, though, in the paranormal, you had some history with using a Ouija board and seeing apparitions in your own house. What was the next step? You obviously, that perked your interest in paranormal research, but then what happened after that? I know you both had some involvement with Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are pioneers in this field.
Well, that was really the catalyst that set us on our road to paranormal investigation. My brother and I had studied all we could. We'd investigated on our own, but then we met Ed and Lorraine Warren at a lecture at Rhode Island College, and we thought, wow, these are two people, a married couple, who have been all over the world investigating paranormal phenomena. All over the country, they've been all over Europe, and so we began to think maybe we're not so crazy after all for wanting to study these things, study this phenomenon, these manifestations. And we did learn a lot as far as the technique of paranormal investigation from Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Yes, we met Ed and Lorraine at a lecture that they were presenting at Rhode Island College. And we spoke to them afterwards and told them that we have an interest in paranormal investigation. And that night we also met some members of a paranormal investigative group at Rhode Island College, you know, PIRO, Paranormal Investigation and Research Organization. They invited us to join, and we became members of that organization and started to go on excursions investigating suspected hauntings and sites where anomalies had been reported.
And if I'm not mistaken, your very first case turned out to be a case that you two have come to specialize in human haunting.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, we had done localized investigations around the area we lived in, but the first major investigation we were called into turned out to be what I consider an inhuman demonic case. And you remember that very well, Carl?
Oh, yes.
Harrisville, Rhode Island.
Calling it inhuman, apart from the more typically reported human type of haunting, where somebody will report seeing a spirit, and it seems to be making its presence known, but generally is not too hostile or seemingly resentful of the inhabitants. This entity we were dealing with, that we were investigating, really seemed to want the inhabitants of that house out of there. And
yeah. Do you remember how it was the family first came in contact with us?
well, you'd placed an ad in the paper, hadn't you? Yeah.
Right, yes, I did. This was
No
before-
internet back then.
No, this was
long
before.
before the internet. We didn't have any access to the internet. There was, all we did was put an ad in the local paper that I'd written up, and I didn't think anybody would actually answer it, but I took a shot, and 3 weeks later, we did get a call from a woman who was saying she was having serious problems in her home, and she saw us, and we were a ray of hope, somebody that won't think she's crazy. These are people that actually investigate this phenomena, so that's how we were called in.
And that was the first time we heard that oft-repeated phrase, "You're going to think I'm crazy."
Right,
We tried to set her at ease. No, that's why we have this organization, to investigate reports of hauntings. I think as soon as we walked through the door, we were convinced it was genuine. There was just a feeling of oppression there. The air was thick with tension, with a feeling of hostility.
Right, this was an 18th century farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island.
Yeah, now this was all very subjective at first, before we had the more obvious and objective evidence that we collected there. But just going into that house, you could tell the people were being harassed by something. They were very tense, very upset. They weren't seeking publicity by any means.
Right.
And
Even when we first met
Yeah.
the client, whose name was Carolyn, and we had our first meeting with her, you could tell she was genuinely upset. She didn't seem to be telling us a story for publicity. Her hands were trembling. She was an attractive, very intelligent young woman, young mother in her 30s, and she was genuinely going through something, and you could tell the stress level she was under. She'd moved into this 18th century farmhouse, which was her dream house, and she's relocated from out west, and wow, this was the perfect country setting. And the man who sold the house to her told her, I feel that you were meant to live here. I feel the same as you. This house has been waiting for you to move in. So she moved in with her
It's never a
children.
good sign.
No, well, not in this case it wasn't. Not in this
incidentally, most states have a real estate law where the owner of a property is required to disclose information about a suspected haunting.
Yeah, that was actually a precedent set through Ed and Lorraine Warren when a client of theirs took her case to court, and the Warrens testified as expert witnesses in her defense. And I know in Connecticut now, if you ask, you have to request the information. A landlord or a house seller does have to disclose information that the house is allegedly haunted.
Which does substantiate the premise of a house being haunted, if it's actually been legislated. And then somebody must disclose this information.
Right. Well, Ed and Lorraine Warren proved beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt this house was haunted, so to speak, and that's why the book.
At Carolyn's house, I remember when we went back there after our initial interview with the family, her husband was suffering from the influence of this suspected presence there. He had visible scratches on his arms. He was shaken. He was the sturdy one at first, the one who took a while to accept that there could be a haunting in this house, but he was getting very agitated. And again, these people weren't seeking publicity by any means.
No, they wanted this kept very confidential.
Now, what are some of the things we found there in our first and second visit there? I went into a room that it was in August, and it was kind of a sweltering night, but one room was like an icebox when you walked into it, and the windows wouldn't open. At other times, the windows did open quite easily, but that night, and of course allowing for that under hot conditions, wood will expand, and moisture will seep into the wood, but still, these windows just would not budge. And there was that feeling of heaviness there. The children were reporting seeing something strange coming into their bedrooms. They had a dog and a couple of cats that were getting very agitated at that time, and they hadn't been before.
I think one of the pets had actually been killed, even though it was in a contained cage outside. They found it, it had been stabbed to death or something, and a really, really horrible situation. As a bit of slapstick, one time, Carolyn, when she had first moved in, she was rearranging a closet. One of the coat hangers flipped off the rack and began rapping her on top of her head, I guess letting her know that she really wasn't welcome here as she thought. But she fled downstairs in terror, and I guess that was just the beginning of the phenomena she was going to experience, her and her family.
And I beheld a shadowy form that seemed somewhat human in shape, suggestive of a human form. It was like cloud-like coming down a corridor when I went up the stairs. It's one of our policies not to be alone at any time during a paranormal investigation for two reasons. One, the safety issue. If somebody were to injure themselves, they have their partner on hand to assist them. Another reason is to corroborate evidence. If somebody hears or feels or sees something at that time, they have somebody there with them to verify that it was at that time they experienced it. But I traipsed upstairs on my own, and that's when I saw this shadowy form moving towards me, and then it just dissipated. And that was our first visit there.
Were you actually ultimately able to assist this client with the haunting?
To a
eradicate
degree.
the
It was comforting to them that we were there to assist them.
Right.
But
that we weren't condemning them or judging them, that we were there to help them. And we did a full investigation, and we verified that there was actually quite a bit of phenomena going on in that house. Even though we were there for only one night, we did experience quite a bit ourselves. And with this information, I made the suggestion that we contact Ed and Lorraine Warren because of their experience. And they, in turn, were responsible for bringing in clergy. Eventually, a blessing, a religious cleansing, was done in this house, and that seemed to nullify the activity for quite a bit. Didn't totally get rid of it. In other words, it wasn't a total expulsion of these entities, if you want to call them that. But what they said was that the entities were nullified. It was up to the family not to restart this haunting. You know, they could work together as a family to keep the phenomena at bay, so to speak.
Okay, and we should also let everyone know that New England Anomalies Research did actually go in and recently do another investigation in that
house
home.
Many years later. Of course,
different
the original
family.
Yes, right. It doesn't live there. It's a new family who lives there now. This family who lives there now is not experiencing anywhere near the same activity, not the same level as the original family was. They're totally different people. They're of a different mindset. Plus, that cleansing was done. They have experienced a few things here and there that they really consider paranormal. But are they harassed? Are they oppressed? No, not at all. They simply believe that they're sharing their house with certain entities which are unseen, but they live pretty well with it, actually.
Yes, not every client to whom we respond wants their house rid of the presence. Some people just want it confirmed that it's a haunting, or they want more information about it. Some people will say, no, we don't want our ghost gone. We just want to know more about it. If it's a more malevolent case that's suspected to be demonic, then they want it gone. And we can't guarantee that we'll chase away some unseen entity, but we can investigate it. We'll do our best to find out the origin of this. We'll interview the clients, get some background history on them and the house itself, and who's been living there before. We can assist them in that way, but we can't guarantee we're going to cleanse your house.
Right. We can't make any kind of a guarantee that we're going to put a stop to this activity. We can guarantee we'll be there to help, we'll be there to understand, we'll offer all the assistance we can. And many times we have been very successful in helping people with their problems that they are experiencing that seem to be of an unknown origin. And of course, if anyone's watched the TV series Ghost Hunters, you'll find out that many times there is a mundane explanation, or it's combined with mundane explanations. So we try to cover all our bases, which is why we formed New England Anomalies Research, to actually go out and help people, assist them with their problems.
So we're not so much classified as ghost hunters per se. That's part of what we do. But as is implied by the name, New England Anomalies Research, we want to investigate what's happening, get to the root of it if we possibly can. That doesn't mean we're going to find a ghost. It doesn't mean we're necessarily going to explain away by, mundane causes. It's an anomaly, something out of the ordinary, and we're going to try and research it.
Is this what you ultimately want to accomplish with your investigations, with your part? To be able to prove or disprove that something exists in a particular situation, a particular haunting
Oh, yes.
home?
Of course, I and others always want to find something. I mean, it is more of a gratifying feeling when you can allege that it is probably a genuine haunting. Again, I don't want to use definite terms, but if you can reveal it as a probable, genuine paranormal phenomenon or set of phenomena, then I believe that's a successful investigation, and as well as a disclaimer when you find that it's due to explainable causes. It's more exciting when it does turn out to be something not totally explainable and possibly of a spiritual nature, but harder to define.
And that's another thing. There are other paranormal investigation groups throughout the country that they're very content to go in there and investigate. However, when it gets to the level of an inhuman spirit, or what's believed to be a non-human entity, then the activity increases, and a lot of times they're not really that prepared to deal with it. They find that, well, this stuff is for real, and it's serious, and that's why we try to help educate the public to the reality that this phenomenon does take place and it does go on. And fortunately, we do have many colleagues and friends who are equipped to deal with this. And when it's an inhuman spirit, they seem to know what they're dealing with. That's the approach we try to take as well.
And we'll always encounter people that seem perhaps all too willing to believe in spiritual causes for a phenomenon. And there are the people that are hardline skeptics that believe it's all due to hallucination, imagination, or wishful thinking. I try to balance that. I try to remain objective and skeptical in my way, but open to the possibility that it could be a genuine haunting in some cases.
Okay, well, that's what we want to accomplish with our organization. Keith, you want to tell them what we want to accomplish with Ghosts Are Near, our show here?
As I said in the beginning, we're going to cover as many aspects of the paranormal as possible, show our investigation techniques, get the message out to the public, what we're doing and what we exist for as an organization. And so far we've covered a lot in the short time we've had, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching, and believe me, this is just the beginning. There's a lot to cover, and it's a whole brave new world out there, so to speak. I thank my guests, Sandra and Carl.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you for watching. We hope you tune in again. God bless.